The recording going. Today's topic is the dark side of authority, lessons from psychology for business leaders. So welcome everyone. It's 3 p.m. Central. Time to get going on this topic today. It's a great one. I haven't, uh, really defined here if this is going to be a half hour or a little bit less, but we try to make these no more than a half hour so it'll take up too much time out of everyone's today. But nonetheless, let's get going. So we're diving into a chilling yet critical aspect of leadership here, how authority can shape behavior, sometimes for the worse. Okay, we'll explore two of the most famous psychological experiments on power and obedience and uncover the striking relevance that it has to the business world. There we go. All right, so why do people obey authority, even when it goes against their moral compass? Well, leadership isn't just about directing. It's about influence, pressure, and the unspoken weight of power. And as we'll see, when authority goes unchecked, the results can be shocking, literally and figuratively. So in any, I think, social psychology curriculum in the United States, you're going to come across Stanley Milgram's experiment. So let's start with Milgram's infamous 1961 experiment. And volunteers were told to deliver increasingly severe electric shocks to another participant whenever they answered a question incorrectly. Okay. In reality, the shocks were fake, but the emotional distress for people, and this gentleman here is one of them. Okay. That distress was real. So the question that Milgram wanted to answer was pretty simple. How far would people go when instructed by an authority figure? So I found one of these videos. There's several, but the Milgram Experiment 1963, you could YouTube that or look for the YouTube channel Psych Hub UK. Very interesting, and there's also a book on the subject as well. So that's recommended reading or homework from today. So Milgram's findings, the obedience effect. Results were pretty disturbing, actually. It's a staggering 65% of participants, just a hair under 2/3, continued delivering electric shocks up to a level that they believed could be lethal to the individual on the other side of the wall. Of course, that individual was in on the experiment, or perhaps even a recording. I'm trying to remember exactly how it went, but they were a Confederate, and they were in on it, screaming out in pain, please stop, please stop. But, the people that were delivering the shocks believed that these shocks could be lethal to that individual. And they did it because they were told to do so by what they saw as an authority figure in a white lab coat. Okay. And as I talked about just a moment ago, even as they heard screams of pain, their sense of responsibility was overridden by obedience. Let's talk about business parallels. Think about this in a business setting. Right? Have you ever seen employees follow orders they knew were wrong just because the boss said so? Corporate scandals, fraud, cover-ups, unethical sales tactics, they often stem from the same psychological forces that Milgram exposed. When employees feel powerless to challenge authority, organizations suffer. So this is an AI image, and so was the one on the last screen. This one's much better than the last one, but that's depicting an individual from Silicon Valley. She had a habit of dressing like a very powerful leader in the technology space. Of course, we're referring to Theranos here, and I'm not going to comment on the intricacy of that particular case from a legal standpoint, but I did have a chance to come across Tyler Schultz in a webinar where he was speaking and was able to ask him, what did it feel like in that environment? And his answer, in short, was it felt pretty culty. Okay, there was a lot of pressure from those in his circle to conform, to not challenge authority. So these things are real, very real, and they happened far too often. Let's go to the classic one here now. Another infamous experiment. Okay, we're talking about Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment. How Zimbardo ended up so popular after putting together an unethical, very unethical experiment is something to consider on another time and place. But nonetheless, it's the Stanford Prison Experiment, where college students were assigned roles as guards or prisoners at random in a simulated prison. What was supposed to last 2 weeks had to be shut down in just 6 days. Why? Well, because ordinary people, when given unchecked power, became disturbingly cruel. And I think it's important to note that even Zimbardo himself was drawn in on it. He was the lead researcher, and if not for his girlfriend, as I remember it, visiting, the basement at the Stanford Psychology Department at a time when the guards were walking through the prisoners essentially in their underwear or undergarments with bags over their heads. And he was like, look what we're learning. What we're going to get out of this experiment. Isn't this great? And she was like, Phil, what are you talking about? These, uh, these young men are suffering. They're suffering badly. So there was a movie made here not too long ago about the Stanford Prison Experiment, but also available on YouTube. Is the documentary. So you could research that as well to learn a little bit about how the guards and John Wayne is the nickname of the famous lead guard, and how they came about to do some of the things that they did. So this experiment provides profound insights into how ordinary individuals can commit extraordinary acts under certain conditions. Okay, and Zimbardo led the Stanford Prison Experiment, and he observed unsettling parallels between his study's findings and real-world events. So notably, 30, maybe it was 40 years later, he recognized the abuses at Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. uh, Similar things. People were being dehumanized, doing dehumanizing things. And you can read about that in his book called The Lucifer Effect. A lot of extra um, homework for you today, by the way. But in both scenarios, individuals placed in authoritative roles within environments that lacked oversight and clear ethical guidelines, they encouraged and engaged in dehumanizing behaviors towards those that were under their control. Now, Zimbardo will argue that these situations demonstrate how systemic factors can lead well-intentioned individuals to commit heinous acts. All right, and this pattern of behavior is not isolated. So as we deepen our discussion on obedience to authority, here's one for you. Christopher Browning's Ordinary Men, another book that you can get out there on Amazon, provides a chilling real-world example of how individuals under certain pressures come to justify and execute unimaginable actions. Okay, the study examined Reserve Police Battalion 101, which was middle-aged, working-class men from Hamburg who were drafted into police service during World War II. Okay, these men were not ideologues of the current regime at the time. Okay, nor were they professional soldiers. Yet, under the weight of perceived duty and authoritative command, they became active participants in mass executions, deportations, and they ultimately played a direct role in the deaths of tens of thousands of Jews in Germany-occupied Poland. What makes this case study particularly striking is that these men were given a choice. Their commanding officer explicitly stated that anyone who felt unable to carry out the killings could opt out without any punishment. Okay? Now, despite this, fewer than 15 of the 500 men chose to step away. Why? Because of their deeply ingrained sense of duty, responsibility, and group cohesion. Many of them rationalized their actions not through ideological fanaticism, but through the belief that they were simply fulfilling their assigned role. right? Doing what was expected of them, just as soldiers, police officers, and employees often feel bound to perform their tasks regardless of personal discomfort. So Browning's analysis highlights three key psychological forces that drove these men to comply. First is obedience to authority. And we talked about that with Milgram. Their orders came from above, and even when uneasy, they felt compelled to follow them. Conformity to group norms. Here's another one for you to YouTube. Obedience to dark conformity is what it's called, dark conformity. Um, and it's not as deep and dark as the topics that we're covering today, but real world, what it means in, I think most of it is set in like a hotel room, like it's a job interview. And they also flash back to some events with, I think, some fires in London, like a London mall. It's really good. It's probably maybe 15 minutes. Um, that's a great one about conformity to group norms. Okay, which when we're talking about conformity to group norms, it means seeing your peers comply, and that made resistance feel socially isolating. So in the extreme, we're talking about ostracism. Um, and ostracism, separate topic. We could probably talk about that under the same umbrella of dark side of authority. But anytime we're separating ourselves from the group, it's really a powerful thing. And then the last is the weight of perceived duty. They frame their actions not as murder, but as following through on an obligation to their superiors and comrades. Okay. So this pattern echoes what we saw in the Milgram experiment, the Stanford Prison Experiment, and as Zimbardo later described in the Lucifer effect, in real-world atrocities like Abu Ghraib. The process of moral disengagement happens quickly. Zimbardo's research shows how people in positions of perceived duty can transition to committing severe abuses in just a matter of days. And similarly, in Robert J. Lifton's The Nazi Doctors, he found that newly recruited doctors at Auschwitz acclimated to their roles within approximately 2 weeks. So what does this mean for leaders in business, right? That's why we're here today. Like, let's bring it back to business. It just underscores the immense responsibility that authority figures hold in shaping ethical culture. In organizations, just like in historical atrocities, people often conform to perceived duties rather than personal morals. Employees may feel obligated to cut corners, manipulate data, or overlook misconduct simply because it's what's expected or what everyone else is doing. Leaders must be vigilant in fostering a workplace where ethical decision-making is prioritized over blind obedience. Here's another one, the Kitty Genovese story. We come across that in social psychology textbooks as well. So why does power change people? The three forces are at play. One, de-individuation, when we lose our sense, which is when we lose our sense of personal identity in a group. Diffusion of responsibility, when we feel it's not my decision, it's theirs, the rest of the group. And social conditioning, when we're taught from a young age to obey without question. Okay, these same forces operate in businesses, and it affects company culture, and it affects decision making within the organizations. Let's talk about number two. The murder of Kitty Genovese in 1964 became one of the most widely discussed cases in psychology and sociology, not because of the crime itself, she was raped and murdered, but because of the public reaction, or should we say, rather, the lack thereof. Genovese was attacked outside her apartment building in Queens, New York, and reports at the time suggested that dozens of witnesses heard or saw parts of the attack, but they did not intervene or call for help. So this case led to the formulation of the bystander effect, which describes the phenomenon in which individuals are less likely to take action when others are present, assuming that someone else will step in. So psychologists John Darley and Bib Latane, hopefully I got that last name pronounced correctly, they further investigated this effect through controlled experiments. Well, that's important. It's controlled experiments. They found that the number of bystanders As it increased, the likelihood of any individual taking action decreased. Okay, it's a phenomenon known as diffusion of responsibility. So essentially, the more people that witness a crisis, the less personal accountability each person feels, which then leads to collective inaction. So, if you've taken a CPR class, one of the things that is, in my experience, part of that curriculum is if somebody needs emergency attention and you're the one that's going to be providing CPR, right? That's why you're taking the CPR class. You look up and you call out, "Hey, so and so with the blue shirt," something specific about that individual. You say, "Call 911." You look someone in the eye, because if you just yell it out in random, somebody call 911. It's just less likely that someone does that or someone does that immediately. So we want to make sure that diffusion of responsibility is something that we control for. This has profound implications not in just emergency situations, but also in organizational and business settings. Employees may witness unethical behavior, financial misconduct, or workplace harassment, but fail to report it, assuming that someone else will step in. The bystander effect can erode accountability and allow toxic environments to persist. For leaders, we want to take these dynamics into consideration. All right, so how do we avoid becoming the authoritarian leaders that we fear? It starts with intentional leadership. True leadership isn't about control, it's about empowerment. Here's how we break the cycle of blind obedience and power abuse in our own teams. Well, feel free to take some notes, but we're going to post this video out on YouTube. And so, you can download the transcript or make some notes later if you're not doing so already. But here are 4 ways to prevent power from corrupting your leadership. First of all, is to encourage dissent. Create a culture where employees feel safe to challenge bad ideas. Lead by example, secondly. Show ethical behavior at every level. Create psychological safety. Allow employees to express concerns without fear. And lastly, question directives. Teach teams to ask, is this the right thing to do, instead of who told me to do this? So let's look at 2 real-world cases. Company B collapsed under a scandal because employees blindly followed unethical directives. Company A, on the other hand, empowered employees to speak up, stopping a bad decision before it spiraled. Which company would you rather? Well, you've probably heard about the one on the right. At least I did graduate school in the mid 2000s, and Enron was the quintessential case study. Toyota's, which we're going to talk about, I don't quite remember. Certainly should have been if it wasn't. But with Company A, Toyota, the Anden cord, stopping production for quality control. Okay, so Toyota's legendary Anden cord system allowed any employee on the production line to stop the assembly line process if they identify a defect. Okay? Rather than fear punishment, this is important, employees are rewarded for taking responsibility and ensuring quality. So this system goes through great efforts to prevent the bystander effect by empowering individuals to take immediate action. And again, I think it's important that people not feared punishment for stopping the assembly line. Those things are pretty costly, right? But rewarded for taking responsibility. It's a pretty big deal. Now, Enron's collapse is a textbook case of employees following unethical directives due to the pressures of authority. Executives encouraged fraudulent accounting practices. Many employees went along with it, fearing job loss or retaliation. And it is tough to be a whistleblower. But that is a subject for another day. But nonetheless, that makes it why, retaliation is such a big deal. Even those who recognize the wrongdoing stayed silent, assuming others would intervene at Enron. So again, this mirrors Milgram's obedience studies, where people prioritized obedience over moral judgment. You must set the stage to encourage the right thing to happen. Let's take a moment. I'd like to ask you to take these questions into your own leadership journey and reflect. And again, this video will post shortly out on YouTube. But self-reflection is it's an important and valuable thing. Ask yourself, have you ever followed an order you just, okay? If so, why? Right? The real uh, what's the old saying, right? It's best that we learn from the only mistake is not learning from the mistake. Secondly, how do you encourage your team to challenge authority when needed? Okay, well, you're the leader, people are followers. They're looking for us far too often permission to do these things. Okay. What steps will you take this week to ensure power is used responsibly in your organization? And remember, just small reflections can lead to big changes. All right, as we get ready to close here, hopefully this is not covering the quotes here. Well, I'll find out when I go through and upload this to YouTube. But it says the measure of a leader is not how many follow blindly, but how many think critically under their guidance. Okay? Authority is a tool. It can build or destroy, inspire or suppress. And as leaders, we must choose to wield it wisely. All right, as we close, a handful of minutes less than our 30-minute threshold. I'd just like to thank you for joining today's session. I'm going to hop over quickly and see if there were any questions. And also just note that here's the website for future webinars. The summer, people like to do summer things. So we don't have a lot of webinars over the summer. Fall, we're lining up. We do have one out there right now. You can go out to the website, check it out. So we've post our information there. Straightforward today / roundtable. All right. No open questions. 7 minutes early. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Really appreciate it. If you can, if you're out on LinkedIn, make a comment, follow us on Straightforward Financial Insights LinkedIn page. And hope you learned something today and tell a friend. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.